You can build vocabulary in Chinese with flashcard apps and spaced repetition, but reading is more effective and more enjoyable. It helps you recognize words, understand how they are used in context, and builds your sense of how the language works. Hello and welcome to the Hacking Chinese podcast. In this week's episode, we are going to focus on vocabulary acquisition, but not through flashcards or spaced repetition software, but through reading. As we shall see, good old reading is often superior to flashcard apps, both when it comes to learning new words, but also maintaining the knowledge of words you have already learned. This podcast episode is based on a guest article written by Kevin Bolloy from WordSwing, and WordSwing is where he and I have created text games for Chinese learners, which you should also check out. But since I'm not the author of the article, I'm not going to talk freely about this topic, but rather I'll read the article to you. And there are graphs and diagrams in the written article on Hacking Chinese, and when necessary I will refer to those as well. But I think most of this episode will work well even if you only listen to it. So here is Reading is a lot like spaced repetition, only better, written by Kevin Bolloy. Read by me, Ole Linge. A central question in strategizing how to learn a language is how to best allocate your study time. There are numerous ways to practice, including conversation, flashcards, watching movies, reading, audio courses, and more. For some of these activities, like flashcards, you could always spend more time, while others are limited by your circumstances, such as conversation opportunities. Both reading and flashcards fall into the category of something you could always spend more time doing. But how should we weigh whether to allocate more or less time to these activities? And what if reading, such as reading while playing games like we discuss later, is more fun than flashcards? How do we balance that with any efficiency or efficiency benefits of flashcards? Because our goal is to strategize about optimal learning, let's think about each of reading and flashcards in fairly optimal forms. For reading, this amounts to reading engaging, ability-appropriate material, and for flashcards, this amounts to reviewing cards using the principles of spaced repetition. Spaced repetition is a strategy for reviewing vocabulary that uses increasingly long intervals between reviews of a word as you learn it better and better. The idea is that, as long as you know something better, you can remember it for longer periods of time without seeing it again. This has two benefits. First, you don't waste time reviewing things you already know, while simultaneously ensuring that you review new stuff before you forget it. Second, perhaps the act of recall after not seeing something for a long time actually results in a brain recall process that is more effective at encoding the memory. Some of the most popular algorithms, like the one in Anki, uses exponentially longer review intervals, say by doubling the review intervals as you learn a word better. From the memory and cognition literature, it's clear that spaced repetition is an effective way to learn things, but the jury is still out on how important the precise timing parameters are, as these seem to not hugely affect outcomes. C.E.G. Carpenter and Deloche, 2005, and Karpicki and Rodiger III, 2007. Although reading and flashcards seem to be very different modes of practice, I hope here to persuade you that reading actually has a lot in common with spaced repetition, sharing many of its most important benefits, in addition to offering many benefits of its own. Additionally, I attempt to compare the relative efficiency of reading and flashcards, so we can get to the central question of how we should allocate our time. There are several steps to learning a Chinese word. These include, first, learning the basic meaning of the word. Second, broadening one's understanding to encompass the various ways the word can and cannot be used, and what connotations it has. Third, remembering the word long enough to use it or recognize it again, thereby creating an opportunity for it to be a functional part of your vocabulary. Fourth, storing the memory of the word in your brain long-term, months or years. Learning vocabulary through flashcards is mostly concerned with learning the basic meaning, number 1 in the list above, and the spaced repetition help greatly with medium and long-term memory, number 3 and 4. On the other hand, reading or listening to longer content like sentences and paragraphs is especially helpful for developing a much fuller understanding of words and how to use them, number 2. But reading, like many activities, is actually a form of spaced repetition. Instead of an algorithm controlling the timing intervals, the spacing between occurrences of a word is an incidental result of what is written. Thus, reading is excellent for the memory aspects of learning too, number 3 and 4. Suppose you see a new word like 上网, which means to go online. Perhaps you know the character 上, but not the character 网, which means net or web. The character 网 happens to occur about 3 times out of every 10,000 characters. But if you're on the topic of the internet, you might see 网 again much sooner, i.e. after a short review interval. Perhaps you see it next in the word 网路, which means internet. Much later, if you're reading something else, perhaps you encounter the word 蜘蛛网, which means spider web. This delay would correspond to a long review interval. These are the natural timing dynamics of language, but the result is that normal reading share timing characteristics with spaced repetition, at least at a coarse level. Perhaps this shouldn't be too surprising. Our brains evolved in an environment where our experiences were not organized into precisely increasing exponential intervals. That's not to say that pure spaced repetition might not be more efficient per review, but we must not ignore another highly important factor, the total number of reviews. During the course of reading, you are likely to encounter vastly more words per minute than you are if you're turning flashcards one at a time. Our goal here is to understand how learning Chinese vocabulary through reading compares to using flashcards. I am mainly concerned with how efficient the process is. Can you learn more words per minute by reading or using flashcards? And how do the two methods compare for long-term retention? Here, I don't treat learning to write words or how to remember this long-term. Instead, I focus just on learning and remembering meaning. To make this concrete, I will use the content from the text adventure games we have developed at WordSwing. These games are aimed at intermediate students of Chinese and are a little bit like interactive graded readers. That is, the material is written to specifically exclude difficult vocabulary and limit the overall number of words. In these games, you make choices such as climb out of the window or bargain for a cheaper price that affect the subsequent course of the game. Thus, these games are also a bit like text-based role-playing games. If you want to try a game to see what it's like, you can try Escape for free here, and I'll put a link to this game in the show notes. One of our missions at WordSwing is to use WordSwing itself as a platform to improve language learning through content, tooling, personalization, and experiments about how students learn. We have a great deal of data from the thousands of students who use WordSwing to learn. And so the starting point for these simulations is actual transcripts of what students read while progressing through our text adventure games. As much as possible, we set up our analysis in a way that reflects actual WordSwing study behavior. To compare reading to flashcards, we try and stack the deck, so to speak, in favor of spaced repetition, even if this is overly optimistic. That way, if we reach a conclusion that paints reading in a favorable light, we know it should be quite robust. We keep the overall study time and schedule the same, as well as use similar metrics for what it means to learn a character. The table below gives the assumptions we made conducting these simulations. So when reading this table, I'm first going to say what it says in the column Graded Reading Text Adventure Games, and then follow that by saying what it says in the column Spaced Repetition Flashcards. So first we have sample actual transcripts from WordSwing student historical data. And in the spaced repetition column, we have build a list of 1,400 words from the games, excluding very common ones, and introduce words in frequency order. We use WordSwing's spaced repetition algorithm, which is similar to Anki. Next, we have total 15 hours of study broken into 20 minutes per day, taking a day off per week, and this is the same in both situations. Next, we have assume students read 57 characters per minute, which is based on our observed data. And for the flashcards, we review 8 flashcards per minute. Next, for the text games, we have more than 51,000 characters of Chinese text, and for the flashcards then, 6,300 flashcard reviews. Finally, we suppose that learning a character requires seeing it twice on the same day, and at least 10 more times across at least 5 additional days. And for the flashcards then, we suppose that learning a character involves reviewing it 10 times at exponentially increasing intervals, and the 10th interval is about 2 months. Through these simulations, we start to get a picture of whether the natural spacing of characters in our text adventure games is comparable to explicit spaced repetition using flashcards, and how well this might translate into how many characters you are likely to learn and remember. Result number 1. You are likely to learn more characters through reading than a comparable amount of flashcard study. And here there are graphs in the article that you can check by visiting the written article on Hacking Chinese. A large part of this result is that you end up being introduced to more characters overall, roughly 900 by playing the games versus 700 by studying flashcards. And given our games often involve seeing the same words a bunch of times, you can learn perhaps 100 more characters over the 15 hours than if you studied the same words via flashcards. Result number 2. The characters you learn comprise a bit less of typical text. With flashcards, you can control the order in which you learn the words. And so we set the experiment up to learn the words in descending frequency order, most common words first. Not surprisingly, if we tabulate the fraction of typical text that is composed of these characters, we find that learning through flashcards means that you'll be able to read a larger percent of what you see. But it's worth noting that the learning through reading is not far behind. The difference is explained by a few common words that don't occur much in the games, and so you miss these. Result number 3. How many times you review each character at each spacing is similar between spaced repetition and the text games. That is to say, reading is a lot like spaced repetition. If you see a new character, it's likely you'll see it again shortly, and then after that you'll see the character at a variety of spacing intervals, which will help your brain solidify the memory. And again, as I mentioned earlier, for the graphs and the actual numbers, you can check the written article on Hacking Chinese. Conclusion. The title of this article pretty much says it all. Reading is a lot like spaced repetition, only better. Not only does reading share many of the timing dynamics of spaced repetition, it likely even results in more overall learning due to the much higher volume of material you can read compared to spaced repetition. And reading allows you to encounter the words in a variety of contexts, fostering a more developed understanding of the word's meaning and how it's used. Learning words in context may even be more effective per encounter. Plus, reading can be a lot more fun than flashcards, particularly if it's playing a game like Wordswing's text adventure games used in this analysis. If you haven't tried any of them yet, you can play the game Escape for free by following the link in the show notes, as mentioned before. Our comparison assumed that you'd spend the same amount of time on flashcards versus playing the games. But judging from our students, we know they spend a lot more time playing the games than studying flashcards. And these are just the benefits of reading for learning vocabulary. Reading also helps learning a language in many other important ways that go beyond the focus of this article. That said, I think there is a place for both flashcard-based review and reading. When your vocabulary is rapidly expanding into increasingly rare words, you might find yourself forgetting many of these by the time you see them again, even if you've managed to remember it for many days. Plus, flashcards allow you to practice more types of active recall, remembering the word given a definition, remembering how to write it, etc. Keeping a healthy spaced repetition habit can greatly help you keep these words in your memory, but it takes a lot of dedication, and it's easy for a flashcard queue to get unmanageably large and intimidating. So that was Reading is a Lot Like Spaced Repetition, Only Better, written by Kevin Bolloy. And for tables, numbers, and graphs, as well as further reading and references, please check the written article on Hacking Chinese. Thank you for tuning in to the Hacking Chinese podcast. If you like this episode, please share it. More information and inspiration about learning and teaching Chinese can be found at hackingchinese.com. See you in the next episode, and until then, good luck with your studies.